Welcome back to the Psychedelic Podcast. This is your host, Paul F. Austin, and today I'm talking to Hamilton Souther, Master Shaman, an innovator in plant medicine, and also the founder of Blue Morpho, one of the first healing centers in the Amazon.
It's important to understand that the shamanic archetype is trained from a deep calling for many, many years to be able to wield and understand the depth of knowledge necessary to be considered a master. And so it's important to just look for that and support that, because then you're supporting the people who took the time to gather those skills in that capacity. You're honoring the effort that they put in over, many decades to understand the practices at the depth that they do.
Hey folks, welcome back to the show. Today we're diving into the fascinating world of shamanic plant medicine with a guest who's truly bridging ancient wisdom and modern innovation. I had the pleasure of speaking with Hamilton Souther, a master shaman whose journey took him from the tech-driven Silicon Valley area to the heart of the Amazon. We explore his incredible transformation and the founding of Blue Morpho, the first healing center in the Peruvian Amazon focused on Amazonian natural medicine. Our conversation touches on the critical importance of education, lineage, and safety in shamanic practices, as well as the distinctions between psychedelic guides and shamans. In 2002, at the age of 23 and fresh out of university with a degree in anthropology, Hamilton Souther opened Blue Morpho, pioneering a new approach to healing in the Peruvian Amazon. He's a unique figure in the psychedelic space with one foot in ancient traditions and another in cutting-edge technology. Hamilton is actively involved in Web3 and AI, not just keeping pace with the future, but helping to shape it. His mission is to awaken consciousness and harness technology for the betterment of humanity. In our conversation together, Hamilton and I discuss his journey from the tech world to becoming a master shaman, the founding and mission of Blue Morpho, the role of education, lineage, and safety in shamanic practices, the differences between psychedelic guides and shamans, and Hamilton's vision for bringing greater education, standardization, and safety to the psychedelic renaissance. I met Hamilton over a year ago. I had heard about his work for many years, so it really was cool to get him on the phone. And there may be some skepticism coming into this episode because he's a white dude who's working with ayahuasca in the Amazon, but this dude really knows the landscape. He has incredible chops. He's been down there and living in the Amazon for over 20 years, and consistently his center is talked about as one of the premier ayahuasca centers in South America. So I really think you're going to enjoy this. Keep an open mind coming in and let us know what you think about the episode afterwards. And as always, follow the Psychedelic Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Share this with a friend or family member, and join us on our free community platform at community.thethirdwave.co. Hamilton, I wanted to bring you on the show in particular because you're a Westerner who has really followed the shamanic path, and you've done it at a high level of integrity for many, many years. So I think to get your perspective and a sense of your journey would be very insightful for our listeners today. So I'm really grateful you've joined us for the show, and welcome.
Awesome, Paul. Thank you so much. It's great to be here and happy to share my story and whatever wisdom I can.
Where are you from originally? I'm curious.
Originally from the San Jose Bay Area. I was born in San Jose and grew up in that area. Yeah.
Was that a community or an environment that you really loved and appreciated? Were there, like, in terms of growing up there and being in the Bay, how did that maybe influence, or did it even at all influence your early kind of plant medicine path?
Yeah, I think it's all an influence. It's a hyper-competitive society, and the people there are very driven for success. And, that obviously created the tech industry the way we know it in the world today, including all the tools we're using to even have this conversation. So it was a big deal at that time. I think it instilled in me values that became very important in how I approached plant medicine, including the idea of education and training and the importance for it, the need for great teachers and mentors, and ultimately the kind of dedication that it takes to become good at something. And that applies just as much to plant medicines as it does any other field in the world. And so I think that having that experience about the idea of thriving and striving for excellence was important in my youth.
Did you work in the tech space, like the .com boom, that area before stepping into plant medicine? Or did you pretty much go from university into a pretty deep shamanic path?
Yeah, no, in my case, the .com boom happened during my education. So I was in high school when all of that started. And so I had very little frame of reference for it. I was an athlete, so we didn't really, weren't in the labs so much. And so I was sort of a more social scientist scholar. And so that part of the tech boom kind of passed me by, and I left to go to Colorado and Boulder for university. And part of that was the nature and the outdoors. And I focused on anthropology and really studying people. So I was interested in ancient cultures. I was interested in modern cultures, and ultimately really interested in studying the people that were alive today through an anthropological lens. So I missed that tech bubble. And funny enough, the whole career has circled around that now I'm involved in a number of tech projects. So both in AI and Web3. So it's kind of the second big boom of all of that I'm actually involved in now, but having come to it from a plant medicine background.
So you were at CU, like Boulder, Colorado, or
Yeah.
you went to CU? Because Naropa is also up here. I didn't know if you had. So you went to CU. You studied anthropology. Did you ever learn about Richard Evans Schultes and sort of plant medicine and ethnobotany in university? Like, what kind of tell us a little bit about if your path crossed over with that at all?
Yeah, very little. I knew of it. I mean, we had heard of it, but it wasn't something that was so important. I was more interested in the intersection of indigenous cultures and this kind of idea of other. It wasn't so much about plant medicines, although in the studies we came across the belief systems of tribal peoples and their use of visionary substances. So I'd been introduced to the idea of it and found it fascinating, although I didn't conceive at that time that it could be real or true or shared with Westerners. I thought it might have been a point of view or a lens on reality, but not a fundamental fabric of reality itself until much later in my life.
And so what brought you into medicine work? Why is it that you found yourself in the Amazon? Sort of where does your story begin when it comes to ayahuasca and this path?
Yeah, I had graduated from the university and kind of had lost my mentor in the year that I was graduating, and the direction that I had in my life. And I then didn't have a direction anymore. And I'd gotten to this place where I felt very lost. And my mom said to me that if I didn't want my life, then I should just give it to spirit. Like, I wasn't in any kind of like notion of self-harm. I just didn't know what to do. I'm like, I don't know what to do with this. I don't want this. She goes, well, give it to spirit. So I gave my life to spirit, and spirit answered in a really big way. And once I had that sort of like climactic moment, where I give my life to spirit, I started to have an awakening. And I understand now that that'd be very common for anybody. It's not specifically like powerful to solely my story. It's what happens when you move beyond that fixation of your own ego and you realize that beyond your ego, there already is something much greater than you that's out there and really influencing everybody. So that happened for me in my early 20s. And it also happens to be a very guiding aspect of our lives, whether we're aware of it or not. I just became aware of it at that time. And so you also have, when that happens, a kind of extraordinary vision or premonition or a connection you feel to a greater guidance here in life. And so I followed that down to the Amazon and was really following spirit for a number of years, looking for this answer to, that deeper question, who are we and what's happening and what's going on here? And that led me to ayahuasca. And then in my first ayahuasca visions, it was very clear that I was supposed to stay there and train, and ultimately fulfilled that through a subsequent series of years.
Tell us a little bit about the intensity and frequency of that. When you start to enter that training path to work with ayahuasca, what does that involve? What are the protocols? What does apprenticeship look like within that context?
Yeah, ayahuasca apprenticeship is unique to each culture and each lineage, but there's a thread that ties them all together. And some are much stricter and harder, and some are a little bit more lenient, and all of them test you to your merit and your mettle and how you can really survive it. For me, it was a series of what they call dieta, which is this traditional time of fasting and drinking of medicinal plants, and also the inclusion of ayahuasca ceremonies as part of that. So I was trained in ayahuasca, the trees that they call palos, the trees of the forest. I was trained in the sanangos as well, which is another kind of visionary plant. Toway, it's another visionary plant. Emapacho tobacco, solely in the Amazon. I was trained to work with Madre Coca in the Andes and San Pedro in the Andes as well. So I had this sort of broad spectrum of disciplines that I was being taught. And so that just looks like a lot of plant medicine experience. And my life at that time, I wanted to dedicate myself fully to that. And I was fascinated by the transformative and healing arts that the médico-vegetalistas or the shaman knew. And so it looked really like dietas and ceremonies to a frequency of about 8 to 9 months of year in dieta, and anywhere from 120 to 150 ceremonies, ayahuasca ceremonies a year.
Wow. So quite intense. And you were doing this at a time when there weren't a lot of Westerners necessarily who had started this path or had started to go down to the Amazon. There were a few here and there, sure, but it was quite early. What was it like to be, in 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007, to be in the Amazon, drinking medicine, working with ayahuasca? What did friends, families, culture, like, did you have any sort of awareness or perspective of what people outside the Amazon thought, or were you just so committed and dedicated to that practice that the entire world sort of shut off, outside world shut off at that point?
Yeah, it's a great question. There were both. The outside world shut off for me, except when I would go visit. And at first, there was very little interest in what we were doing, but I knew that I had discovered something very important. And I knew that it was going to become more and more important. There's obviously tremendous legal prohibition at the time that still exists in many places around this. So it was difficult to foresee how this would expand and grow. But the impact that it had as a true medicine and the way that the culture treated it as a medicine represented something very important to medicine in the greater understanding of that context. So just medicine global needed this medicine to be part of it. And there was a gap where there was a need for these kinds of visionary substances. So I knew that that was going to expand in popularity. I didn't know exactly how it would be. When we were working, we were really just in our own bubble, connected. But then I also saw this neo-shamanic revolution start forming. And while I wasn't as forward in the organization of conferences and those kinds of events, I started to hear about them happening in different places. There are other organizers. And I focused early on our work and large-scale publication and publicity at that time. So I was putting the word out to the world, hey, wake up, everybody. There is this incredible medicine that's necessary, and we're in a mental health crisis on a global level, and there's this medicine that can tremendously help it. And there were others that were now organizing around that had those skills. And this whole resurgence in indigenous medicine happened over the course of 10 years. And it even got, named the Neo-Shamanic Revolution. And I'm just grateful to have been one of the pioneers in that and supportive of its expansion.
And so was this around the time that you started Blue Morpho? At what point does the Academy and your retreat center come into the picture of your overall trajectory?
Yeah, Blue Morpho started, but actually during my apprenticeship. So okay. Blue Morpho first was a jungle adventure business, which was taking people out to the area of the forest where I was apprenticing and living. And within 6 months, people weren't interested in the jungle adventure. They wanted to drink plant medicines. And so I was translating for my teachers. I wasn't practicing myself. I was, a new apprentice. I didn't have the skills to be practicing myself. So I was just translating for them and letting the local mystics and healers work with them that were interested, and helping try to facilitate that relationship and continue learning myself. And just from the results that we had, things naturally grew. We didn't seek any kind of other greater marketing or promotion, et cetera. It just happened that people came down, turned out to be writers, and they wrote about their experience and it was published, or other people started to share as social media started about their experiences, and this natural kind of publicity and growth took place. And it was an interesting, exciting time. Blue Morpho grew as a center between, by 2002 to 2006, we were figuring it out. We were pioneers in what this kind of really kind of very specialized plant medicine experience needed to be like and how people could get the most out of it. And then it grew exponentially. So pretty soon, by 2006 to 2007, we were hosting 30 to 40 people a week that were coming to have these experiences, and continued on that pace all the way until COVID. And we're back to that pace now. And so Blue Morpho was this epicenter at that time for change and epicenter for sharing of the medicine.
That's phenomenal. So very early on, obviously the interest in ayahuasca has 10x'd, or I mean, I don't really know the statistics specific to ayahuasca, but it's grown exponentially just in the last probably 6, 7, 8 years. Blue Morpho was probably 10 years even prior to that, right? 15 years prior to that, you were starting to do medicine work. What were maybe some of the harder lessons you had to learn as you were, stepping into this space, coming from the Bay Area and Boulder and into the jungle? So you as a kind of a Western white person perspective, what were some kind of points of challenge or edges that you came up against?
I think everything was a challenge and an edge. It was all difficult. The first was to get the lineage to open up and accept me. Like, they allowed participants to experience their medicine, but not teach it. It was a taboo to teach outside of the bloodlines. So just to get accepted was a huge honor and a tremendous edge case. I think then it was to get accepted by the community and have the community actually embrace the fact that now this taboo had been broken. So one was to get the lineage to accept and then the community to be okay about it. Ultimately, we did that by providing medicine and healing the participants from those communities, the members of those communities. And then it was to figure out how to organize. We had to interface with the government and explain to the local government what we were trying to do and wanting to achieve. And we had to get plant medicine from just an indigenous practice to a part of tourism, something that they could understand, that foreigners would come here and experience this and that it would be okay and it would be safe and that they would be able to continue their journeys. So there was that interfacing with the government, which was also a tremendous honor to get that opportunity to think about a brand new aspect of tourism and what that could look like for people. And then it was really learning how to work with people from all over the world of all different ages going through such an epic and intense experience as ayahuasca can be. So, that was also a tremendous edge case in learning. And along that way, it was pushing on me personally, giving me the opportunity to work through my own fears and doubts and embrace a greater form of faith and understanding of spirit that, it really does work itself out. And as long as you stay aligned with really clear values, you can navigate the crunchier and more difficult times.
Yeah, that sense of staying centered, presence, the work even we do with medicine helps us to, it sort of acts as this elasticity for our consciousness where we're able to handle and navigate more complexity. And I also find that it provides an impetus for deep purpose and meaning. So these challenges that arise or come up are able to be seen through because there's a deeper, as you said, a deeper connection or a deeper sense of spirit or divinity that's connected to it. And so these pioneers like yourself and other folks who have been doing this work for 15, 20 years in the Amazon, it's rare. There's just a handful. And so to be at that inflection point must have come with a lot of excitement, but also challenge and difficulty and unknown. I experienced that too with third wave and microdosing, and having been around for 10 years or so now. The broader bridge we're trying to create right now is between kind of Western modernity and psychedelics, and feels like what you did in the Amazon was a really great microcosm and laboratory. And I think that's what's leading to my next questions. Like, what are some of the lessons or insights that you've learned over the years that you think are applicable or would be applicable to how the West as an example, can learn from plant medicine, can work with plant medicine, can be sort of successful in its integration of plant medicine? What would be some of your observations?
Those are great questions. First, the plant medicine is not a one-size-fits-all shoe for medical problems. It's miraculous, but it's not the miracle, and it needs to find its place within the other kinds of medicine. I think the second thing is that there are many people who are not candidates for it. And we need to really watch for that as this spreads, to understand, just like when you go to a doctor, there's a diagnosis and a very clear training in what's appropriate and not appropriate to prescribe. The same applies with these kinds of plant medicines. The third is that the shamans / medico-vegetalistas / mystics that practice with this medicine go through the same duration of training as Western doctors. So somehow the indigenous people figured out it takes 10 to 20 years to produce a really good medicine person. And somehow the Western medical system figured out it takes 10 to 20 years to produce a really good doctor. And they both use the term médico for each other. So the training is something that is incredibly important. And we have to respect that, even though it seems like right now in the psychedelic renaissance that a lot of people want to be guides and they want to be facilitators sooner than they've had the experience to amass. So we need to just be careful about that. And I think the responsibility right now is on the participants to demand quality service from their facilitators. So it's the responsibility of the individual to say, how long have you been practicing and who did you train with, and do the background check to understand that there is a lineage there backing this person of the transference of knowledge along the way. The final piece is an emphasis on safety. In the Amazon, safety comes first about all of these plants, and there's a very clear tradition and culture about how to use them in a safe nature that is not transgressed or broken. And I've explained it in our academy that plant spirit medicine is not a drug culture. It's a medicine culture. And there's two very different things. The Western drug party culture, going to now explore into plant medicines, is a big cultural leap to take. And you can turn plant medicines into a drug culture, but you can't turn a drug culture into plant medicine. You leave a drug culture when you come to the sacredness of the plants in the way that they're used in their traditional form. And so that's a huge thing to understand in the expansion of the psychedelic renaissance, that there will be experimentation, but the true medicine practices have intention, a diagnosis, a process, a treatment plan, an actual treatment associated with it. It is not just a source of experimentation or exploration spiritually. And so I think that that's also necessary to understand. And then with that, an appropriate method or plan that you would follow. And I see it in the microdosing culture just as well. I see people that are taking doses that aren't microdoses, calling it microdoses. And they're actually macrodosing, and they're thinking they're microdosing. And they're like, well, today I didn't feel the microdose, so I took 5 microdoses. And that's not a microdose. So the dosing is also incredibly important. You can't take 10 microdoses on a day. I drank a 6-pack of beer. I had 1 or 6. That's not a microdose anymore. So just framing this thing correctly, I think, is also really important. And then also understanding that there is a way to work with the plant safely so that we can get over the other side of it, So to get over the fears and the propaganda that has been put out about this. I don't think it's fair to treat the plant medicines under the same scrutiny of other kinds of drugs that really are harmful. The plant medicines are actual real medicines. They've been utilized by our ancestors for thousands of years. They have a real purpose within our society. They're not used to harm or destroy society in a traditional sense at all. So I think from that perspective, it's also important to get over our fears. There's a lot of fear in the ayahuasca space about the potency of the medicine. So we want to get over that as well so that the appropriate candidates can receive the medicine that they need.
And I like how distinctly you're drawing these parallels between mainstream medical, we don't even call it but Western medical doctors, right? Prescribers, protocols, treatments, right? And the use of plant medicine and ayahuasca in indigenous contexts and cultures, and even in some ancient contexts and cultures. And I think there's a way in which the indigenous system of medicine is already so much more interconnected that there's like a web that's already been established that ayahuasca easily sort of seamlessly fits within. Whereas in Western medicine and how that overlaps with psychedelics, it feels like a lot of people, even if you look at the lineage of like how the Greeks worked with psychedelics and plant medicine, it was for this spiritual or religious practice. There wasn't necessarily, a medical treatment that people were going in for, or this diagnoses, or this, having this sickness, which I understand does happen a lot with ayahuasca and yopo and wachuma and these other plant medicines in South America. So I just also want to speak to that the religious sort of spiritual component is important. Sometimes that can be used to heal, and that's the intention. And sometimes it may be for kind of communion, connection. I mean, I hesitate to use the word exploration, but almost like in a psychonautic kind of fashion,
Yeah, the plant medicines, first, when we look at it from a traditional perspective, it's called plant spirit medicine. So there's a plant component, there's a spirit component, and then there's a medical component. And the medical component, is the part of the transformation and healing that takes place. And the spiritual component can be seen as a fully spiritual or religious purpose. Like the religions in the Western sense come from an understanding of the sincerity of belief and practice behind them. And the medico-vegetalistas and the mystics have an incredibly strong notion and sincerity to their belief. And so there's this union where spirit is seen as energy and a kind of animus, that it's not just a dead, empty universe, it's an animated universe where there's a greater consciousness and a greater intelligence that's behind all of this, or part of all of this. And that's what they refer to as spirit. And so we can dissect that and create these individualized verticals, which is like, this is the spiritual exploration, and this is the consciousness exploration, and this is the medical healing. But in an ayahuasca ceremony, it's all three at the same time. And the components, they ebb and flow through your experience, impacting and becoming part of the journey of that experience. So there's this part where you can't move on if you don't release the illness. And the illness has this greater context to it. It's not just random matter that needs to come out. It has this psychological context associated with it, and it seems to be connected to something much greater about the universe itself. And I think that's where then the idea of plant spirit medicine really comes true. And you can truly focus on one aspect of that, or you can receive that in its holistic expression.
So one question that's coming up that we prefaced a little bit in the intro and we talked about before we went on is just what it's like to, and we've talked about it a little bit, but I want to ask a more specific question around it. What it's like to be someone who's been in the Amazon for almost more than 20 years now, who came from a Western context. You talked about this path being 10 to 20 years of training to become a really good shaman, shaman person, shamanic practitioner in particular. What do you see as the difference between, you hinted at it a little bit, but the difference between a guide and a shamanic practitioner? What are the elements that a shaman needs to master or know or understand that someone who's just simply guiding? Like we have a retreat as part of our practitioner training. I guide a ceremony with mushrooms for about 40 to 45 people, right? I don't pretend to be a shaman. I'm not invoking, or I'm not doing anything shamanically, but I guide the ceremony. So what do you think are some of the distinctions then that really sets apart a shaman and someone who's listening to this who might be, I'm interested in exploring this path, or I feel like I'm aligned for it? What might be the signs or the indicators of that?
First, that somebody's gone through shamanic training. I think it's important to understand that the shamanic arts were created out of these plant medicines. They're not the plant medicines themselves. So, like, you can have somebody who takes mushrooms, like you just mentioned, and somebody who takes mushrooms and practices shamanic arts, and they're now two different experiences because you've added, this other layer of understanding to it. And those art forms are passed down generation after generation. So the first thing I look for is just, did somebody learn those arts, and do they have a deep understanding of them? Have they mastered the nature of those arts? And you can see that come through in the form of chanting and ikaro, the use of percussion and instrumentation, the use of mythology and culture, and ability to explain the nature of the experience and contextualize it. I think your more modern shamanic guides use more psychology or pop psychology as a way of describing it, or more westernized coaching methodologies that have been created to try to guide and support that experience. Another is, do they understand the nature of spirit and how to work with spirit? Spirit itself is a very discrete, concrete thing for shamans. So it's not just a belief about something or the attachment to a certain kind of animal, but rather a true wielding and using of different energies that change and shift the visionary or psychedelic experience. Then there are medicine arts. Do they know how to heal certain kinds of problems, and do they have a track record associated with it? There are some shamans that focus entirely on helping connect you with spirit. And there are others that utilize spirit to transform and heal aspects of your life, which could be physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, etc. So I think you look for that. There's, I think, a need to look for people who've been dedicated to the nature of those arts. Recently I was asked about our facilitator training, and somebody said, I don't understand why you're saying it takes 2 years to go through the facilitator training when I've been invited by a shaman to do singing bowl work in his ceremonies, and it seems so intuitive to me. And, my answer was, well, you have to learn all the subtleties that are inside the visionary space and how to use your consciousness to affect the other people that are in the room, not just a singing bowl, but actually your consciousness, and you have to train your consciousness. And it's an in-depth process. And so I would look for, has somebody gone through that kind of consciousness training? Do they have the depth and the maturity necessary to handle every possible situation that can come up inside that ceremony? And I think those are some of the basics. Those are just some of the true basics around it. For many, I think being with a facilitator is enough, which is why in our academy we teach sitting and coaching and facilitating. And from that, you can graduate to, higher levels of shamanism and higher levels of master facilitating. But I think for the psychedelic renaissance, there's going to be a tremendous need for people who are just sound, grounded, clear, ethical, moral in their treatment of others while utilizing these kinds of plant medicines. And, there's a smaller need for really well-trained medicine people at that level. Just like you see in Western medicine, there needs to be a lot of people who are doctors of general practitioner, and there are a much smaller number of very specialized surgeons. And there's a lot of nurses and a lot of support care for the industry. And I think the same thing will apply to the psychedelic renaissance. There's a need for a lot of sitters and coaches, and there's a need for a lot of people who can give sound advice and just be moral and ethical people, have integrity within the industry itself. And, there's a much smaller need for real master shamans. And the people that get called to that will dedicate the 10, 20, 30 years necessary to really be that. And I think there needs to be a little more discernment in the understanding of the people who go to them, because a lot of people are using the word shaman now, and they've changed the meaning of it. They've recontextualized it. And so we want to understand that a lot of the people calling themselves shamans aren't very highly trained people yet.
Right. And we don't have the same type of taboo against that like we do in the West. If someone just starts calling themselves a medical doctor, and they haven't gone to medical school, it's extremely problematic. That same level of, I would say, discernment around who does and doesn't call themselves a shaman or a shamanic practitioner. The fact that it doesn't exist is probably harmful and detrimental overall, because pretty much anyone can hang a signpost, and it's hard at this point to tell, in many cases, to tell good from bad, which is why, as you mentioned, taking agency and autonomy in that process and asking the right questions and doing the diligence necessary is essential. And I know that my sense and my experience of life has been that many of the best teachers are more hidden, that great shamanic practitioners aren't necessarily looking how they can scale their Instagram count as high as possible. They have other priorities. And so what I've just found in my experience is a lot of the best shamanic-like practitioners that I've worked with, I tend to just hear about from friends or get introductions from friends. I'm usually not working with someone who's super well known, because if they were super well known, they wouldn't be able to do the type of deep and even eccentric work that they do. It's not for everyone necessarily.
I think in the West, people have needed to latch onto an archetype, and when you don't have an archetype, it's really easy to take on the idea of a shamanic archetype. But it's important to understand that the shamanic archetype is trained from a deep calling. The authentic one is trained from a deep calling for many, many years to be able to wield and understand the depth of knowledge necessary to be considered a master. And so, I've come away from it saying, well, anyone who picks up a smudge stick is a shaman. Anybody who starts invoking and calling upon spirits is practicing shamanic arts. But it doesn't mean they're very good at it, nor they're very well trained, nor they would understand what to do in a crisis-oriented situation. And often things will just be okay, and they'll just kind of work themselves out. And where you really need the help is when things are more intense than that, and you really need help of somebody with skills. And so it's important to just look for that and support that, because then you're supporting the people who took the time to gather those skills in that capacity. You're honoring the effort that they put in over many decades to understand the practices at the depth that they do.
Beautiful. Super well said. So you've mentioned the training program a little bit kind of offhand, and I'd love to go deeper into that with the Academy, Blue Morpho Academy. Tell us a little bit about your inspiration for why you started the Academy, what you wanted to bring into the space that you thought would be supportive, and then also how you think about these different levels. Because in conversations that we've had, you've mentioned numerous levels. So I'd be curious how you think about the sort of trajectory of growth and development through those different levels for folks.
Yeah. Blue Morpho Academy came about out of a need to support the psychedelic renaissance and people who really love and want to dedicate themselves to the plant medicines. So there's this gap between people needing safety and understanding how to use these in an appropriate way and the knowledge and the schooling that's out there right now. And so there's this, it's very hard to get into a true indigenous lineage. It's also very difficult to find yourself in the licensed clinical space. And there's this huge middle ground of people that are just ad hoc doing this. And so I wanted to address that with credibility and to build a way to discern and differentiate for others that somebody has the skills necessary to be calling themselves a certified sitter or a coach or a facilitator or master facilitator. And in the Academy, we created 4 levels. It's sitter coach. They go together. Sitting is the art of sitting for somebody while they have a psychedelic or plant medicine experience. Coaching is advice giving. It's the before, during, after. It's all the talking part of it. It's understanding the skills about how to guide somebody who has started to have these kinds of experiences. And then facilitating is when you start to get into where the facilitator and the individual are both taking the plant medicine so that the facilitator can go into the visionary experience, into the trance with the participant and guide them through the nonverbal, guide them through this consciousness itself, through the visionary arts themselves, and sharing that. And so that'd be the equivalent of like shaman, really well-trained shaman. And then master facilitator is somebody who has truly dedicated their life to this and are mastering every aspect of it. There's the training itself, the safety and well-being of others. It's the ability to navigate the visionary spaces, utilizing all the different visionary arts, the consciousness arts. It's about understanding how to interact with the modern developed world, including legalities and running business and teaching others and supporting them. And then it's the personal, deep, lifelong pursuit of being part of a lineage and knowing that that is a calling that you have in your life. And so it's very progressive. And so it allows people to learn up to the skill levels that they need and want to master. And it allows others who want to take that all the way to the same as being a master shaman, that avenue to do so.
And so my final question as we kind of close or get close to the end here is just around your vision for Blue Morpho generally. From what I understand, you're opening or going to open another retreat center. I'd be curious kind of where you're at now. Is it just the one retreat center? Are there multiple retreat centers? You have the academy. You've already been in this work for so long, 20 years now. What for you are you inspired to create and build, let's say in the next 5-10 years, on your path?
Yeah, there's a beautiful renaissance taking place in all of this. And we now work in a variety of locations. So we have 2 jungle locations here in the Amazon, and we also have 2 locations in the Sacred Valley outside of Cusco, Peru, on the way to Machu Picchu. So in both of the locations, we can work with ayahuasca and San Pedro Huachuma, as well as other medicinal plants that are from the Andes and from the Amazon. So we have those retreats already, and it's beautiful to be part of them. I love being in both different areas of Peru. The vision also expands through a greater network of community that we've developed over the years to really impact the psychedelic renaissance that's taking place. And so we're venturing as well into some of the technology that sits behind this expanding psychedelic renaissance, artificial intelligence, greater standardization to support people having the highest quality experience that they can. And so the next 10-year vision looks like how to impact as many people as we can in a positive way, but also lay the foundation for a unified world around psychedelics and plant medicine. And so we think that there will be, an extensive legalization. And then while we don't participate in the side of legalization and the politics that sit behind it, we're very interested in the infrastructure side of that, about how we could better support people having the tools that they need to receive of this medicine and to be able to explore their spirit and consciousness.
And so you mentioned standardization for experiences. Give us a little bit of insight into how you think about that. What would be a great ethical or safe framework that people should look for in terms of a medicine retreat, a practitioner to go to, whatever that might be?
Yeah, I think that greater standardization looks like ways to just bring context to this whole space. Right now, the space is the Wild West. You have to, kind of figure it out as you go along. And I think just like Western medicine came to a certain level of standardization, the same thing will happen with this. So it looks like ways to be able to find practitioners, know their background, know their education, know what they practice and what they specialize in, be able to see their track record and, the people that have worked with them. I think that there's also protocols that need to be developed so that novices on their own can understand, oh, I want to do this protocol. This protocol makes sense to me. They resonate with it, and that they could, utilize a protocol that could come through technology like an app, or, it could just be a series of steps to follow that somebody could do. I think there's also programs like yours, like microdosing programs that come into play, and people have a more holistic view of the use of these medicines. It's not just a retreat. It's not just a lifetime kind of thing, but rather there's a reason to understand the use of the medicines on a more consistent basis. I think there's also the need to be able to, bring a commonality to understanding retreats and what they offer, and how to give them a certain kind of credibility, especially when they're doing a really good job. So it's very hard to just discern through a web page. This one's a good one, and that one isn't a good one, or might have some issues, or you might not resonate with it. And I'm not talking just solely about, if they're ethical or not. Like I'm not just talking about the edge cases. I'm really talking about, like, do you resonate with the teachings that they offer? Do you resonate with the people that are going to be there, versus another kind of place? And you want to go to a place where you resonate the most. So it's just about how to present the entire industry, I think, in a more standardized way will be very beneficial to others.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That aspect of, you could look at it as regulation, you could look at it as trust verification, you could look at it as vetting, curation. It's what we're even wanting to do more and more of through Third Wave, is how do we help people with that process of discernment. And that it's tricky, it's it's tricky to find a great therapist sometimes. It's tricky to find a great, psychiatrist. And it's tricky. There are lots of ways in which, when we're in these deep relational containers and we have psychedelics and plant medicines as part of them, we have to be very attuned to what is optimal for us, what is ideal for us. And that sometimes requires looking inwards first and asking ourselves these difficult questions, because with that clarity, then we'll be able to find a center that resonates more.
I agree. I think it's the next steps, and I'm glad that there are groups like yours and ours in the world that are taking those steps to be able to support people and have access ultimately in a way that's safe and has integrity behind it.
I love that. Well, Hamilton, thank you for joining us for the podcast today. A lot here, very rich, dense, a lot of context provided. Thanks for sharing your story. Blue Morpho, the retreats are, tell us, there's a retreat page and there's an academy page, or are they the same, separate? Kind of, how do we find out more about Blue Morpho?
You can go to bluemorphoacademy.com, and you can also navigate to our retreats from there. And you can also go to bluemorphotours.com.
So bluemorphoacademy.com, that has also information on the education. bluemorphotours.com, featured in National Geographic, NPR, the New York Times, Oprah. It looks beautiful and fantastic. We'll provide a link in the show notes. And if you have any questions about Hamilton and his training program and his work, you're also on Instagram, I believe. Folks can find you there, or there's a contact form on the website. But reach out if this feels aligned, if this resonates, if this feels of interest to you, reach out. And Hamilton, thanks again for joining us for the episode. Hey folks, thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode. If you enjoyed it, leave us a review, share it with a friend or family member, and continue the conversation on our community platform at community.thethirdwave.co. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to stay up to date on the third wave of psychedelics, subscribe to this channel and visit thethirdwave.co, where you'll find plenty of free resources on the intentional and responsible use of psychedelic medicine.